Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. This is City Talk. Bridges falling down, subways flooding, steam pipes exploding, choking traffic, and power failures. New York today and tomorrow. Here to talk about New York City's physical and economic future is Robert Paaswell, Distinguished Professor of Civil Engineering at City College and the Director of the University Transportation Research Center, which provides research and training to transportation professionals. Professor Paaswell serves on numerous commissions and task forces, including the MTA Blue Ribbon Commission on Workforce Development and the Governor's Commissioner on Higher Education. Welcome back, Buzz.
It's always great to be here, Doug.
My pleasure. It sounds like the apocalypse, my introduction, and it all revolves around infrastructure and decaying infrastructure.
Well,
Talk about it.
As a civil engineer, we know that. I've talked about it over the last month or so. Our bills are coming due. We build it, we have to maintain it, we have to upgrade it. We haven't done that.
Why do we never do that?
Well, a governor would rather, or a mayor, or as a councilman would rather cut a ribbon to, let's say, the 2nd Avenue subway than perhaps put in $2 million worth of ballast on the line.
So you don't get the headlines and the ribbon cutting.
You don't get the headlines, and they don't understand it. You know, it's interesting. I always draw the analogy when I talk about it. If you were a homeowner, you'd know that if you were to let your house go for a year, you'd lose your plumbing, you'd lose your heating, the windows would fall out.
I just blacktop my driveway.
Well, there you go. Well, you blacktop your driveway. Why don't we repair the streets in the same way? And we have to do that. It's expensive. It's hard to find the money. People don't want to spend the money. People think that infrastructure is free. They think it's sort of a right that comes with the Constitution. It's not. And we've got to sort of step back and say that the bills for all these are coming down. The Minnesota example was probably a good wake-up.
Right.
Yeah, the bridge collapse was a real wake-up call. But the American Society of Civil Engineers has been doing a report card on our infrastructure for the last 24 years, and America's infrastructure has always come out with a C-, D+, not good grades.
But nobody cares.
Nobody
until
it's a disaster.
Trucks fall into the river.
Right.
And how long do they care? Is there a sustained movement in the United States, or, well, we'll talk about New York specifically, to address these infrastructure issues?
Not really. There are engineering groups, citizens groups, all push for these kinds of things. I think, you know, let's focus quickly on New York. The mayor says in 2030 he'd like to have a city that looks a little different than it does now. We're going to have 1 million new people. We want to stay the economic heart of the region. And we want to have, we want to do that by making prudent investments, as he puts it. But unless we bring our infrastructure up to state of good repair all over, we're not going to even be able to get there.
When you were last here, which was November of 2003, the major critique was that the city didn't have a long-term strategic vision, that it had a short-term focus. And in fact, we talked about a report that you folks put together at the CUNY Institute for Urban Systems called 2020 Vision, Smart Growth for the New York Metropolitan Region. The situation's changed. The mayor seems to have put together, along with Deputy Mayor Doctoroff, a plan. And
with Ruth Agrawal, a top staff person. This is a terrific plan, and it really says New York should have objectives. What does it want to look like in 2030? Where are we going to be? How are we going to get there? And from infrastructure to housing to planting trees to open space, this is what the city is going to look like.
Oysters in the Gowanus Canal.
Right, whatever.
So this is the type of comprehensive look that you were advocating so long ago.
Yeah, but a look is one thing.
Go ahead.
The resources is something else.
Okay.
How
do you pay for it, number one?
Well, obviously, it can't all come from the city. Some of it has to come from the MTA. Some of it has to come from the state. Some of it has to come from foundations. Some of it has to come from the private sector. So what you need together with this is an innovative financial plan
Right.
for each of these various items. You've got to set priorities. What should we do first? If we do something first, how will it open the door to something else?
Right.
That's sort of where we have to go.
Looking at the numbers, there's $31 billion with 18 projects, and the projects go from the 2nd Avenue subway, the extension of the 7 line, waterfront development. How do you pay for $32 billion, and how do you do it in a reasonable period of time without choking the city with construction?
Well, that's part of the problem. You mentioned I was on the mayor's on the MTA Blue Ribbon Commission on Construction. There's so much construction that's going to go on. There's concern about the cost of labor, the availability of materials.
Bottlenecks, cement, steel.
But we'll get through all that. That's sort of a good problem to have.
I guess.
It gets back again to priority setting. And the priorities shouldn't start with what are the projects you want, but what is it you want your city to be like? Who do you want living there? And we know that one of the things I like to talk about is that the core of New York is the financial capital of the world right now. And, Shanghai wants to be the financial capital, London does, so unless we keep plowing into it, it's not going to be there. So you have all these high-priced people who make their living off there. But they're served by a variety of workers, everyone from their secretaries and analysts to somebody who makes their hamburgers at lunch. Mm-hmm. Those people also have to get to the same area. They're being pushed out. Housing is driving the low-income and the middle-income workers further away from from the edge of the city. Excuse me. If the commutes become too arduous or too long for them to come into the city, they're going to go look for work someplace else. Mm-hmm. So we might not be able to sustain the kind of labor force we want in the core because the service to support them won't be in there either. Low cost. We need to build housing. That's a high priority. We have to make sure that our transportation, our power, and our water systems are up to date.
So those are the 3 priorities.
Big priority. Well, they're general priorities. Then within those, you have specific priorities.
Okay. Let's start with transportation.
Transportation. The most critical thing in transportation is to make sure that our systems are working as well as designed. That's the subways and the streets, too. And there's a lot we can do to add capacity to the systems and we've talked about this before in previous shows, by adding intelligent transportation, computers, information technology.
But the MTA seems either incapable or reluctant to do this.
No, that's an old MTA.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's an old
we'll
MTA.
talk about the change in the MTA.
There's been a major change in the MTA,
Go
major
ahead.
change at the top, a major change through the organization that's, I think, welcomed by the workers of the MTA and the MTA operating units like the Transit Authority and the Long Island Railroad.
And planners like yourself.
And that people who understand transportation are running it. Mm-hmm. City DOT, Jeanette Zadokhan is running it, Lee Sanders running the MTA. You have somebody named Tim Gilchrist, who's a governor's top guy for infrastructure. These are all transportation pros.
So you have the people in place.
And I call it sort of the alignment of the stars right now in transportation. And it's a very important thing to have in the city. It's important because these are the people who eventually are going to be doing the following. They're going to be setting priorities. What do we have to build first? Mm-hmm. And this is a little, I guess, vague for a TV show in setting priorities. But we'll get back to setting priorities. Then figuring out how we're going to pay for those priorities. Where is it coming from? Lee Sander at the MTA has been floating an idea of changing fare policy in New York, something that hasn't been done in a long time. Peak off-peak pricing, deeper kinds of discounts. The idea that again, I say bills are coming due. Public transportation costs a lot. There are no economies of scale in public transportation. The more you operate, the more it costs, mm-hmm. plain and simple. Every trip costs, a couple of dollars or something like that. And they have to be paid for. The previous governor, earlier mayors didn't want to pay for this. They sort of withdrew funds, and the MTA was sort of starved of funds for a while. Mm-hmm. And we sort of began, a lot of planners began to see it drifting towards the 1970 conditions. And we're delighted now to see people come in, begin to think strategically, do just what you said. Where should we put our first dollar? And the idea of putting the first dollar is the first dollar should have the biggest impact on your investment. Then mm-hmm. where should the second mm-hmm. dollar go? And they're beginning to think that way, and they're organizing that way, and I think we're going to see some major changes in
How do we
operation.
spend it? Where do I spend my first dollar? Where does it go? Transportation.
Well, the first dollar should be bringing everything up to the way it was designed to operate.
And that will cost, and that will take how long?
It would take probably 10, 15 years to. Well, you're continually doing it. I mean,
Right.
But you don't just do that. In the meantime, when you've committed to doing that, adding new signals, adding new track. Let's talk about city streets, redoing city streets with instrumentation in them so you can do innovative signaling, changing lanes, maybe getting, putting in exclusive lanes for new bus rapid transit or special innovative transit systems. You put all that in at the same time that you're thinking about the fact that we need a Second Avenue subway.
Right.
We may or may not need a 7-line extension. That's up in the air. We certainly don't need, paid for out of the public sector, an airport connector. But that's something the private sector can pay for very easily and would have a great impact on Lower Manhattan.
And will they? Or won't it happen unless the public picks it
Well,
up?
I think it won't happen unless the public shows some interest in it. But
the Second Avenue subway is
well, it's
is
the east
prime.
side. It's the east side of New York.
Because the only thing we have is the Lex line, and then when that's down, forget it.
And people are already talking about the fact that that development on the east side, and it was in the Times yesterday, development on the east side, or Sunday, development on the east side is already advertising access to the Second Avenue.
Sure.
Side. Access creates value. And one of the things that I think is important for funding the mayor's plan is if you're going to invest in transportation, access creates value. The people who gain the benefits of that access should be shareholders in that value. We need to have more developer buy-in on subway stations. I always say that no subway station on the Second Avenue line should be paid for by the MTA. It should be paid for by developers. Well, nobody in any of the development community would like to hear that.
Do other jurisdictions do this, and do they do it successfully?
Hong Kong does that all the time. I went to Hong Kong, and they showed me how around a subway station that they developed the high-rise apartments, and that would Hong Kong had a very innovative way of financing their transit system, but development was a very critical part of it. And when I was there visiting, they tried to sell me an apartment. That's how aggressive they
Hey,
were. So
did
I
you
wasn't
buy?
I wasn't in the market then.
Okay.
So
So you got the Second Avenue subway. You've got innovative financing. What else? What else do you need transportation-wise?
what we just talked about is sort of the broad things. You need transportation basically to improve the access to work of the workers of New York City. And we see that people's commutes are getting longer and longer, whether it's on the roads or
Right.
whether it's by transit. This is going to get us around to congestion pricing problem.
Almost immediately.
Right. But in the mayor's plan, which is really an ideal plan, 1 million more people, and when I was interviewed on a film thing for the mayor, they said, think of how congested the subways will be if we don't make any changes and we add 1 million more people. And my comment was, if you don't change the subways, you're not going to have 1 million more people.
Right.
Because they won't want to be there.
It'll
Upper West
break the
Side, the
development,
East Side,
right.
they're all crowded
Right.
already. People.
Right. Well, I mean, go to Queens, go to the Bronx, go to Brooklyn. They're crowded there too.
So you reach a point where people say it's not worth the trip anymore.
Right.
Maybe I'll want to live in New York, but I'll work in Jersey, I'll work in White Plains, work someplace else. You know, and so the economy of the city is dependent on having good infrastructure, because infrastructure is what's created this huge wealth, and we haven't captured any of the value of what the investment in infrastructure has been. And we've got to think of new models for doing that.
Okay, let's move to congestion pricing. One of the hallmarks of the mayor's plan, or at least the thing that's gotten the most attention, is congestion pricing. And we've had Dan Doctoroff here talking about it. Briefly explain what it is and why you see it as a vital alternative here.
I'll tell you what congestion pricing is, and then we can talk about what the mayor's plan is, because they're not exactly the same thing.
This is why you run the show.
Congestion charging basically says that what you want to do is create a cordon around an area and charge people to get into that cordon because the streets have value to them, and if you want to be there, you have to pay for the privilege of driving your car there. But the reason you do congestion pricing is because your area is congested. It's congestion pricing, congestion charging, as they call it in London. You want to remove some of the cars. You want to do one or two two things that engineers measure. One is you want to reduce the volume of traffic, and you want to increase the average speed of traffic going through there. All the other things that come out of it, better environment, improved transit, all these other things.
Mitigating health impact.
Those are wonderful benefits, but the purpose of congestion charging is to reduce congestion.
Okay.
Now, let's talk about this because there's some important points here that just sort of go by the wayside, and a lot of times it's hard to sort of grab people by the shoulders and they don't understand it.
Grab some shoulders.
You have an area, let's say you take the core of Manhattan south of 60th Street or 86th Street. I live at 75th Street. I wish the mayor would make it 74th Street.
Right,
but that's,
right. I mean, yeah, just before my house.
Right, just before my house, right? So congestion charging, you take some of the cars out of the center of the city. The city is very crowded now. You know how slow it takes to go from on 33rd Street from one side to the other midday. You might as well.
I walk.
And even
or
that's
I take
crowded.
The subway.
And even that's crowded.
Right.
You reduce the number of cars in there, and all of a sudden you have freer flow conditions. The area becomes more attractive.
Right.
People can move around in there.
Right.
As it becomes more attractive, think of what I'm saying. I'm using the word attractive. Attraction in transportation means that you're adding value to something. So what you're doing is you're adding value. That's what they found in London. Everybody's afraid you're going to have congestion charging. You get the cars out, the stores will go broke. Just the opposite. It was easier to get around. More people came into central London. And in fact, they reduced congestion enough so that other people began bringing their cars in, and now they have to raise the price again to slow it down.
And we were ahead of ourselves because in November 2003, in our previous interview, we talked about that, and you made those very same arguments. And I had been there, and it was obvious that that thing worked.
It's unsure what the objectives of the mayor's plan are. Is it to raise money? Is it to reduce congestion? Is it to, as the mayor says, it will reduce asthma in kids? These are all wonderful things. Clean the air, get rid of some of the noise. These are all wonderful things, but what's the prime objective? If it's to reduce congestion, then you might want to use congestion charging. If it's to improve air quality, there are a lot of other ways to improve air quality.
Okay. So we're unclear in terms of what the fundamental goal is.
Right. And I think the mayor's commission or the state commission on this is looking through all that. And I think part of the problem is that this commission also has to look through all these objectives that have been, all the objections to the plan that have been put out by the critics in the state assembly, the local community groups.
Right.
And, you can sort of take those and go through them one by one. One, it's going to hurt the poor. Well, the poor are paying a high price now because they live far away, they have long subway commutes, they're caught in congestion. If you reduce their travel time, you're giving them something back. You're giving them an increment of time that has value. More time with their family, more time doing other activities, more time on the job, maybe more deliveries if that's what they do. So that takes care of that. The other is, and it's an objection that I just sort of chuckle when I see it. Another objection they raise is the neighborhoods just immediately adjacent to the congestion pricing zones will find a lot of people looking for parking. And I look 86th Street. I live on the Upper West Side. I can't picture cars humming around 87th Street, which is already crowded, driving around for 2 hours, not finding a parking space, putting it in a garage for $40 a day, and then hopping to the subway. They'll drive in and they'll pay the congestion charge. Didn't happen in London. It's not going to happen in New York. So, and one by one, you can go through these sort of objections, which are real. I mean, people sense that here's something that's coming. It's a little different than what I've seen before. How am I going to work with it? How can I make it? But the strength of the mayor's plan is that it's consistent with his 2030 plan. That if New York is going to be the economic miracle that it continues to be, plus all the other things that we love in New York, the place to get a corned beef sandwich, see the latest play, read a newspaper in 40 languages or something else like that, to have the diversity that's New York, you're going to have to make sure that you build the infrastructure to sustain that. And building the infrastructure is the heart of this.
Okay, and then the Times article on Monday, October 8th, MTA says mayor's plan to ease traffic will cost $767 million to implement because in order to not have those people in cars, you have to have them in buses and trains.
You have to buy new equipment.
Are we gonna, is that going to happen?
Well, it's going to happen if somebody pays for it.
And, well, even if they pay for it, how long does it take to happen? Is there the political will to do it?
Well,
there are a lot of other questions.
What you have to do, if you were going to, 3 or 4 years from now, begin to put new buses on the street because you want to do congestion charging, you'd have to order the buses right away. They don't. There isn't a store. You don't go to 57th Street and 11th Avenue, next to the BMW store and say I want 10 buses. You have to order them. It's competitive. It takes a long time. There's startup costs and everything. So all this is going to take a long time. It's a real investment, and I would say that to gear up would probably be a 5 to 10 year period for improving your public transportation system. But you also have to improve the streets. Think, they're proposing, buses run on streets, for example. You have to make sure that you have bus lanes. You have to enforce the laws that are there. That's
Forget
the
the
other
bus
thing.
lanes. I mean, London, they enforce the bus lanes.
Right.
Nobody drives in those
That's
buses.
right.
I can't see that in New York.
Well, you have to do it. And that's why they want to have red light cameras, to just capture you. And my son...
They'll be arresting everybody.
My son-in-law in London always likes to tell me about red light cameras because he's got he runs an electrical contracting business, and he also sometimes goes faster than the speed limit. So he gives me case studies of red light cameras that are very expensive.
Yes. Okay, and you talked about bus rapid transit. What is bus rapid transit?
Bus rapid transit. Think of Brooklyn used to have the trolley cars. We used to have our cities.
I
used to
remember
have,
along Jamaica Avenue. Thank
light
you.
Rail. Now, a new form of transit is we can't afford to build rail systems every place, including light rail systems. But we can make a system that essentially operates as a light rail system, exclusive right-of-way, large cars, station space enough so you can have express service, modern vehicles, convenient and fast, pay the fare before you get on the vehicle, a unique kind of vehicle that would move large numbers of New Yorkers very quickly on key corridors like 2nd Avenue, for example.
This seems to make technical and planning sense. Is there a compelling political logic for this to happen?
Well, there is a somewhat compelling political logic. The MTA, the Transit Authority, New York City Transit, is committed to doing one in each of the boroughs in the next few years, and I think they're going to begin rolling them out this year in Queens and in Manhattan.
Let me ask you a question. In 10 years, what will be the most dramatic change for New Yorkers moving around their city? Or what would you like to say?
Well, there's two answers to that. One answer is if we don't do anything, or if we do it too slowly, you're going to see things even more crowded than they are now. And what we probably would see then is real estate prices begin to go down, that people would choose not to live in New York.
And the economic preeminence
Right.
could go down because of
the other way is you begin to put in bus rapid transit. You open the first segment of the 2nd Avenue subway. Maybe the 7 line is actually built. We're going to have a new Fulton Street terminal, so getting into Lower Manhattan is going to be a lot easier. Maybe they'll improve airport access to the 2 airports. Maybe we'll have a rail to LaGuardia. You need all these. You need, in a modern city, you need high-speed rail.
What
to your
about
air
ferries?
services.
We've got all this water, and we don't use it as a transportation.
We do. Ferries, but ferries, after 9/11, the height of it, ferries maybe carried 100,000 people a day.
So the carrying capacity is small.
It's small. The Transit Authority carries 8 million people a day.
Okay. If you had one pet project that you were the czar of, and you had the resources to do it, what would you do?
I would probably, well, I'm going to say something that's totally off the table we haven't talked about. I would reorganize MTA around information technology and give all the managers access to real-time information on how their system is operating, how the fleet is behaving, how it's been maintained.
So then when it rains, then we're all not stuck in the subway for 12 hours?
You can manage your system in real time and really bring your system.
And that doesn't happen at all.
And the way FedEx runs their business, or some of the modern airlines runs their business. So it would be a management thing that I would do. In fact, we haven't talked about that, but that's one of the problems that sort of kept our transportation from changing as rapidly as it should, is that we've got institutional inertia, and I'm a civil engineer. Our agencies are filled with great civil engineers. A lot of them are people who studied with me or my colleagues, so I have to say they're great. And they're City College graduates, so how could they be anything but the best? But they've been working according to very strict guidelines on the projects and how they see those projects. And a lot of them are federal guidelines to do things this way. I call that's sort of the 20th century paradigm of what's happened. In the 21st century, we need a new paradigm for how these agencies work. It's more than engineering. It's law. It's environment. it's public policy, and people have to manage differently. They have different objectives in what they manage. The congestion price is a good example. An engineer would take that and would just give you costs and boundaries, but a modern 21st century planner would say costs, boundaries, community objectives, impacts on where housing might
full
relocate.
systemic impact.
Everything, right, and bring that in law
and
and
is
financing.
that mindset seeping into
It's
the
beginning
governmental sector
Absolutely.
rather than the
It's
the
beginning to
planning
seep
sector?
in with the people that I named who are at the heads of the agencies now.
So you're really pretty optimistic.
Oh,
so
great.
when you
Great.
come back in another 6 or 9 months, we're gonna see some movement here. We're gonna have you.
I'll kick my friends first. I'll
Okay.
make it happen.
Okay, thank you. My pleasure. Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. Let us know what you think about this show. You can reach us at CUNY.TV. When you get there, click on the bar that says Contact Us and send your email. Whatever it is. Thanks, no thanks, obnoxious, do it. Send it.